Good evening. I'm Joel McCower, Executive Editor of greenbiz.com, and we are delighted to be co-presenting this event with the Rocky Mountain Institute, Reinventing Fire. It is, I assume, the first of a four-part series. Is that true? I assume there'll be water and... No? No? Okay, it's just a thought. Do with it what you want. This is, as many of you know, part of RMIQ, which is the first RMIQ, which is the Q stands for Quest for Solutions. And this, in fact, is Rocky Mountain Institute's first event outside of its home state of Colorado. So that is, I think, an exciting time. And my team and I are really honored to be part of this. greenbiz.com, for the last 10 years, the business voice of the green economy, linking arms with RMI for the last 27 years, the leading source of solutions to sustainability in so many fronts. I have a couple of team members here, including my business partner, Pete May, who's the president of Greener World Media. Greener World Media is the parent company. We do a bunch of State of Green business and Greener by Design and a number of other events and reports and things, and that's the end of the commercial. I just flew up from LA, where I was moderating a panel at the Governor's Climate Summit, Arnold Schwarzenegger's second annual due, and it was really interesting just to contrast that with the conversation taking place here in San Francisco. I can assure you that they were not talking about reinventing fire so much. They were, I think, still trying to understand what the consequences are of playing with matches. But something extraordinary is happening there. There is definitely some extraordinary things taking place, and you can tell it's a very special time. I had a panel of 7 governors, 2 U.S. and governors from Canada, Mexico, Nigeria, Indonesia, and Brazil. And if you really start to look at this, you had the governor of Delta State, Nigeria. This is a region that's 90% oil and gas based, trying to reinvent the economy around outside of fossil fuels, keeping the economy going, building a new economy, creating jobs, keeping strife to a minimum. And sort of the flip side of that is the governor of Aceh province, Indonesia, where the 2004 tsunami was, again, trying to reinvent his economy outside of clear-cutting, timber. And there are extraordinary efforts taking place there. And it's a very exciting thing. I think a lot of us, though, the flip side of that, a lot of us and a lot of you who have been in this for a long time, I've been in this space for over 20 years, and I am by no means the oldest in terms of time in this space in this room. There are people I know, many of you, who have been doing this for a long, long time. I think what I find is that increasingly we wake up each day with some combination of exhilaration and fear and impatience. And it really boils down when you start to talk about what's going on. It really has to do with scale and speed. You know, is this happening fast enough? For all the exciting stuff that's going on, is this happening fast enough? My favorite questions these days all begin with the same 4 words. What would it take? What would it take for rooftop solar to be ubiquitous and cost competitive with conventional fossil fuel electricity? What would it take for electric cars to be, you get the point. You could sort of take this to almost any question. And those are the conversations that are really extraordinary, and they really get to the scale and speed. And that's the conversation that I think you're going to hear tonight. And I know that the conversation that's been taking place for the past quarter century in Snowmass at Rocky Mountain Institute headquarters. Although it's important to keep in mind, today happens to be Mahatma Gandhi's 140th birthday. Right? You did send a card, I assume, right? In fact, if you were on Google today, you saw that the G was, did anybody see that? It was a picture of Gandhi's face, his head. And Gandhi has said many, many things that have been quoted, be the change you want to see in the world. But he also said that speed is irrelevant if you're moving in the wrong direction. And that's, I think, where the work that's of all of you, of all of us, the work at RMI, the work in Indonesia and in Nigeria and Brazil and California is so exciting. And I think that's the conversation that we want to have tonight. And to head up that conversation, by the way, I'd like to invite the panelists to come up on stage while I'm introducing. Don't be shy. Amy, Amory, Bill, Paul. I'm sorry. One other bit of business that I almost forgot. I want to thank our sponsors tonight. We've got this great group of sponsors. Two of my favorite Bay Area companies, Autodesk and Hewlett-Packard, along with Bright Automotive's Irisher Foundation, I think I pronounced that right, and America's favorite vintage guitar and clothing store, Two Old Hippies. If you want to know about it, you can ask Bill Joy about that. He'll tell you stories. But taking the evening from here and moderating the panel is Dan Riker. Dan is Director of Climate and Energy Initiatives at Google, where he's part of a billion-dollar effort that looks at energy, healthcare, and poverty, but in the energy field has just driven a tremendous amount of innovation that Google has been little by little rolling out that I think, like many of the things Google has done, is going to have lasting experience and scale. But Dan has a tremendous resume, and I've known Dan for a number of years back, starting as assistant. He was Assistant Secretary of Energy for Efficiency and Renewables, days as in venture capital and Obama transition team. But most important, he, I think, is just one of the smartest, most thoughtful people I know when it comes to the policy, the technology, and the capital that it requires to build this new green economy. So please welcome Dan Riker.
Thank you, Joel. And let me first say that Joel has really done amazing things in our field for so long, and he is owed a big debt of gratitude for highlighting the issues and the opportunities that we have to get our clean energy house in order. I want to recognize two colleagues who are here from Google, Ping Yi and Sam Aarons, and I'm also kind of nervous tonight because my wife and 3 young kids are here. I've never had them actually see me perform before, so I can deal with all of you, but I'm not sure about my 6-year-old, so.
Get used to it.
Yeah, so anyway. I also want to thank RMI for what is a really terrific event. I haven't been able to take part in much of it, but I'm hearing in the hallways that people have just thought so far this is a wonderful, wonderful event. And I think we have a wonderful session tonight with a wonderful title. I just love this, Reinventing Fire. You know, we've been struggling to talk about clean energy for a while, and I think this is about as good as it gets. You know, that's the opportunity here. And before we hear from a guy who knows a little bit about that, I'd like to turn to our eminent panel. We have a terrific panel, and rather than me attempting to introduce each of them, I'm just going to ask each of them to do that themselves, and then we will get on with the event. So, to my immediate left.
Hi, I'm Kathy Zoy, and I'm currently the Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy in the Obama administration, the Department of Energy. I guess what I'd say in the context of what I think Amory is about to talk to us about, I studied geology, and between my junior and senior years in college, I worked for an oil company. We were kind of combing over the same parcels of West Texas and South Dakota we'd looked at for a long time, punching holes in the ground, and it was at that moment I had a little bit of an epiphany. I thought, there's got to be a way to tap into fuels that are free and limitless. So I pivoted, forewent my PhD in geology and studied with a bunch of folks that helped build Amory's house at RMI at Dartmouth, and his house is in Snowmass, but they were at Dartmouth. We were all studying together resource policy and systems, and I've been at it ever since, and I feel like we've got a magic moment right now.
Thank you. Amy.
Thank you, Dan.
Now, no stories, okay?
I have some good dirt on Dan, so afterwards feel free to come over. Yeah. We've worked together in a number of capacities. But I was, I guess I was born to a couple of environmentalists and civists. So my whole life, I feel like I've been determined to find the opportunities to make the biggest impact. So I've worn a lot of hats in the last 17 years of working on climate and energy, from being a lawyer to being in the Clinton administration, which is where some of the Dan stories start, and Kathy's stories too, actually.
Wait a minute.
And now I'm CEO of Christensen Global Strategies, which is my consulting firm, which does allow me to wear a lot of hats and allows me to be flexible in where I spend my time. And right now I'm focused on the Copenhagen negotiations the most, although also in getting the legislation done this year with a group called the Clean Economy Network to mobilize clean tech and green business voices in support of the bill. And we have a big lobby week next week. So those are probably my two most relevant hats to our conversation tonight.
Bill.
I'm Bill Joy, and I'm at Kleiner Perkins, which is a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. Our firm's been around since 1972. I've been there 5 years and started the third practice. We historically had a life science practice and an information technology practice. Now we have a green practice. We have about 45 startup companies innovating in green, of which I'm involved in about a quarter of them. So that's what I do every day.
So we have a Joy and a Zoe. I like that. This bodes well.
Good synergy. My name is Paul Holland. First, I want to thank Amory and the folks at RMI. I'm incredibly excited to be here. I'm really flattered to be up on stage with this group of people. I mean, this is maybe the best panel I've ever been involved in, so I'm super excited about tonight and looking forward to meeting some of you. I coordinate the clean tech practice at Foundation Capital. We're about a $2.5 billion, primarily early stage venture firm down in the Silicon Valley. Prior to 2002, we were best known for having funded companies like Netflix and Net Zero. Since then, we've had a very thriving practice in the area of clean tech, where beginning in 2002, we focused on the notion of energy efficiency and the demand side of the equation. So we found that we had kindred spirits with Amory and the folks at RMI. We work in the first LEED Gold office in the history of venture capital, which we just tilted up about 9 months ago out of an existing building. And my other side of my life with my wife, Linda Yates, who was on a panel earlier today, we're attempting to build the greenest custom home in America. We're tracking at about 124 LEED points, so we're well above platinum. So that's my life.
Beyond platinum, what is that, plutonium or something?
I don't know. We'll let them define it.
All right. We're supposed to be serious, but this is Friday night, so we got to. With that, it is now my great pleasure to spend no time introducing a man who needs no introduction and who's only going to get up and speak for 30 seconds. It's my great pleasure to introduce Amory Lovins.
Thank you. Since 1982, our little band of innovators at Rocky Mountain Institute has been hatching game-changing innovations to help make the world richer, fairer, cooler, and safer. We figured out how to achieve tripled efficiency cars, trucks, and airplanes, laid many of the conceptual and practical foundations for electric and water efficiency and for widespread renewable energy, reinvented energy strategy, super efficient engineering design, real estate development, security, and with Paul Hawken, a natural version of capitalism, and devised profitable solutions to climate change, oil dependence, nuclear nonproliferation, and critical infrastructure vulnerability. So what has all this been preparing us for? After all these timid little trial runs, why don't we tackle something a bit more ambitious? RMI's strategic focus, our next big thing, might just qualify. Put simply, we intend to reverse the past quarter millennium's dominant global way in which people get and use energy. We aim to end the antique and increasingly dangerous practice of digging up fossil fuels formed hundreds of millions of years ago from primeval swamp goo, and then burning those fuels to recreate those swamps' tropical climate. We expect to extend from oil to all fossil fuels. Our leadership in envisioning and creating energy systems that, in the words of our trustee, Ray C. Anderson, who is here, take nothing, waste nothing, and do no harm. We mean to speed the transformation from pervasive waste to elegant frugality, and from liquidating energy capital to living better on energy income. In short, we are reinventing fire, driving the profitable transition from oil and coal and ultimately gas to efficiency and renewables. This This fire in our belly may keep our 88 staff not entirely idle for a few more years. 2 years ago, as we celebrated RMI's 25th birthday, I invited many of you to envision how energy will work in the world that we're all creating together. I said, imagine a world a few short generations hence where spacious, peppy, ultra-safe 120 to 200 mile a gallon cars whisper through revitalized cities and towns, convivial suburbs, and fertile, prosperous countryside, burning no oil and emitting pure drinking water or nothing. Where sprawl is no longer mandated or subsidized, so stronger families eat better food on front porches and more kids play in thriving neighborhoods. Where new buildings and plugged-in parked cars produce enough surplus energy to power the now efficient old buildings, and where buildings make people happier, healthier, and more productive, creating delight when entered, serenity when occupied, regret when departed. Imagine a world where oil and coal are nearly phased out and nuclear energy has disappeared, all vanquished by the competitors whose lower costs, risks, and delays have already enabled them to capture most of the world's market for new electrical services, energy efficiency, distributed renewables, combined heat and power, and by advanced biofuels that use no cropland and move carbon from air to topsoil. Where resilient, right-sized energy systems make major failures impossible, not inevitable. Where collapsing oil demand and price has defunded enemies, undermined dictatorship and corruption, and doused the Mideast tinderbox. Where energy policy is no longer a gloomy multiple choice test. Do you prefer to die from A, climate change, B, oil wars, or C, nuclear holocaust? We choose D, none of the above. Imagine, therefore, a world where carbon emissions have long been steadily declining at a handsome profit because saving fuel costs less than buying fuel, and where global climate has stabilized and repair has begun. Some may say this vision is too visionary, too bold, too far. Well, at RMI, we don't run away from big challenges and hard tasks. We run toward them, and we've done ambitious things before. Before September 1976, the energy problem was thought to be simply where to get more energy, more from of any kind, from any source, at any price. But then my heretical foreign affairs article redefined the problem from an end-use least cost perspective, asking how much energy, of what quality, at what scale, from what source would do each task in the cheapest way. Once the dust had settled, this concept had won out and the energy problem had been reframed. As my mentor, the inventor Edwin Land, used to say, people who seem to have had a new idea have often just stopped having an old idea. So many energy leaders stopped having some old ideas in 1976. But there are still lots more old ideas that it's time to stop having. Before September 76, virtually every energy expert claimed that energy use and GDP must march forever in lockstep, spiraling upward in a frenetic embrace. But in 2000, America used just 3% more energy, or 1% less energy if normalized to actual economic growth, than my 1976 graft of a soft energy path had envisaged. To make $1 of GDP, our nation now uses half the energy, half the oil, about a third of the water and direct natural gas that it used in 1975. In 2006, our economy grew briskly, while total U.S. use of energy and coal and oil fell because energy intensity went down. That is, energy productivity grew faster than the economy grew. That was despite 26 years of stagnant light vehicle efficiency, despite 48 states rewarding utilities for selling you more energy and penalizing them for cutting your bill, and despite federal policy that comprehensively favored supply over efficiency. Imagine what we could do if we paid attention. What if we realized that we suffer from a shortage not of oil but of organization, not of gas but of gumption, not of coal but of courage? This August, Judy and I visited eastern Colombia with Paulo Lugari, whose extraordinary Las Gaviotas project has created 8,000 hectares of rainforest on the worst soil in the most barren plains in the country, where apparently nothing was supposed to be able to grow. And he told us the only deserts are deserts of the imagination. Las Gaviotas is an oasis of imagination. And he said, there's no such thing as failure here. Every obstacle is really an opportunity in disguise. A decade ago, Natural Capitalism, our book with Paul Hawken, opened with this poem by David White. This is not the age of information. This is not the age of information. Forget the news and the radio and the blurred screen. This is the time of loaves and fishes. People are hungry, and one good word is bread for 1,000. What is the good word about energy that the world hungers for now? I think it's about creating abundance by design. It's about healing the self-inflicted wounds of energy insecurity, climate change, fuel poverty, and many more. Simply by using energy in a way that saves money and by buying the cheapest sources first. And it's about changing minds and choices by showing what exists, what works, what makes sense and makes money, what can save the world. Consider oil. The world uses about 85 million barrels of oil every day. Our former military principal, retired nuclear sub-captain Scott Pugh, envisaged those 85 million steel drums of oil all stacked up, each 30 inches tall and 20 inches in diameter. So Scott said, lay them down end to end, and then remove the ends and join them together into a 20-inch pipeline, and it will extend, those 85 million barrels will extend 1 2/3 times around the world. So to pass through that pipeline in 24 hours, the oil must flow at 2 1/4 times the speed of sound. In 2004, pundits doubted that the imported fraction of America's ever-growing oil demand could be materially decreased, and they warned that any relief of oil dependence would be ruinously costly. Surely oil is the cheapest solution, or we wouldn't be using so much of it. Would we? But then, 5 years ago, RMI published Winning the Oil Endgame, and it's quietly changed the conversation to how quickly total oil use can be cut to zero. How oil, as Jim Woolsey says, can be made no longer a strategic commodity, just as happened to salt when we invented refrigeration. And we showed how to get off oil at about 1/5 the cost of buying it today, conservatively assuming that its externalities are worth zero. We launched 4 years of quiet effort to start implementing the oil endgame via institutional acupuncture, figuring out where the business logic is congested and not flowing properly and sticking little needles in selected sites to get it flowing. Now that work is bearing fruit. In April, the Wall Street Journal said U.S. gasoline demand has already peaked and is headed down indefinitely. That turnaround was no accident. We hope we contributed to it. We aim to accelerate it. And in the industrialized, that is the OECD countries as a whole, oil demand has fallen in each of the past 15 quarters. Yes, we're approaching peak oil, probably not in supply, but quite likely in demand. The building blocks needed to intensify this initial trend already exist. Many of them laid and fertilized and incubated in RMI's little black swan hatchery. We invented hypercars and the vehicle-to-grid concept in 1991. In 1993, we open sourced the hypercar concept so nobody could patent it, then got everyone competing over it, and by 2000, this had leveraged our $3 million R&D investment into an estimated $10 billion or so of industry commitments to that general line of development. Our 1999 car spinoff, now called FiberForge, is commercializing a breakthrough process for making cost-competitive advanced composite structures that could cut cars' weight and fuel use in half, make them safer, but cost the same per car. This technology can ultimately save America as much oil as finding a Saudi Arabia under Detroit. In 2008, we spun off a second car company, Bright Automotive. It's commercializing a 100-mile-a-gallon in the city plug-in hybrid fleet van that needs no subsidy because its lightweight and low drag eliminate most of its batteries. The top electric vehicle journalist figures this is the second best car startup in the country. I'd rank it higher than that. Now, Nissan, Ford, Audi, Chinese automakers are leading a new lightweighting trend. Electric traction, dismissed as a fantasy a few years ago, is sweeping the industry, with most major firms planning to market plug-in hybrids in the next 1 to 3 years. RMI hatches innovations in policy as well as in technology. In 2006, we helped defuse the mass arms race by reversing a federal policy for light trucks, and this spring, the same reform was extended to cars. In 2004, we proposed pay-as-you-drive car insurance. Now it's spreading to several bellwether states. In the 1970s, Howard Rosenfeld, Dick Garwin, and I independently proposed fee-baits to speed the adoption of super-efficient cars. And in 2007, RMI assembled industry partners to devise win-win fee-bait designs. In 2008, France adopted fee-baits, and in the first year, sales of inefficient cars fell 42%, while sales of efficient cars rose 50%. In 2009, a fee-bait bill is pending in the U.S. Senate. In 2008, RMI convened industry partners whose collaboration in accelerating by years the smart garage, is accelerating by years the smart garage, that is linking smart electrified vehicles with the smart grid via smart buildings so they can all profitably exchange electricity and information. This could eventually link utilities to 6 to 12 times more electric capacity in vehicles than is in their power plants, transforming the electricity sector. RMI's project Get Ready is spreading this shift. RMI's researchers sketched in 2004 and detailed in 2008 how to triple the efficiency of heavy trucks, which use 1/8 of U.S. oil. In 2005, Walmart launched a journey from saving 25% of its truck fuel in 2008 to saving 50% in 2015, thereby dragging those double efficiency trucks into the market where everybody can buy them. In 2009, RMI convened industry partners who've now started steering the whole trucking business that way by the U.S. Council for Freight Efficiency. We found in 2004 that doubled or tripled efficiency airplanes were feasible. Now Boeing is test flying a scale model and designing quadrupled to quintupled efficiency military planes. Boeing's 20% more efficient, same cost 787 Dreamliner is sold out into 2018, the fastest order takeoff of any jet in history, and has created a new efficiency-based competitive strategy that's transforming the airframe sector. Even more importantly, 2 years after winning the Oil Endgame urged Detroit to follow Boeing's example, Ford Motor Company hired that leapfrog's leader, the head of Boeing Commercial Airplanes, as Ford's own CEO. After 3 years, during much of which I was privileged to serve on Chairman Bill Ford's Transformation Advisory Council, Ford now looks very different than GM and Chrysler. Ford didn't go broke, didn't ask for a bailout, and is now a hotbed of innovation, seeking competitive advantage through fuel efficiency. Another RMI partner in getting off oil is the Pentagon, the world's largest buyer of oil and of renewable energy. More than 20 years' effort helped persuade it in 2007 to start valuing saved fuel about 10 or 100 times more than previously. The resulting innovations will speed the tripling of civilian car, truck, and plane efficiency, much as military R&D in the past gave us the internet, the global positioning system, and the jet engine and microchip industries. Since civilian vehicles use 60-odd times more oil than military ones do, the resulting civilian oil savings will make oil unnecessary and no longer worth fighting about. so our warfighters can have neg missions in the Persian Gulf. Mission unnecessary. To move military energy efficiency from concept to action, we're helping spread through the Pentagon its new decision metrics that were written into law last year. We also helped create 2 Defense Science Board reports on an efficiency-centered military energy strategy. The first report got lost around 9/11. The second, published last year, is proving pivotal, and our reframing of its approach is now moving towards doctrine, the basic principles that govern military affairs. In short, as I've been predicting for a generation, oil is becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. Winning the Oil Endgame detailed how to eliminate U.S. oil use by the 2040s, led by business for profit, at an average cost of $15 a barrel, half through efficiency, costing an average of $12 a barrel, half through supply substitutions, costing $18 a barrel. After 5 years of technological progress and policy shifts and societal awakening, that potential now looks to me a bit conservative. For example, switch your present car or light truck to a good hybrid, drive it properly, and you have its oil use per mile. Make it lightweight and low drag, which you should have done first, and you have its oil use again. Fuel it with 85% ethanol, say, made from woody, weedy, inedible plants like switchgrass, and you save 3/4 of the remaining oil. Now you're down to 6% of what you started with. Make it a plug-in hybrid, and your oil savings rise to 97%. Even greater efficiency is worthwhile, as illustrated by Hypercar's 2000 Revolution SUV or Toyota's 2007 1X concept car. That's a plug-in hybrid that has the interior volume of a Prius, half the fuel use, and 1/3 the weight. Battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell cars that efficient could cost-effectively eliminate the last 3% of the oil and even the biofuel tool, and we figured out the hydrogen transition strategy in 1999. So the journey beyond oil is well underway. Someday policymakers may catch up. To be sure, there are deniers and naysayers, skeptics and stick-in-the-muds. As Wellman Maurice Strong once said, the fossils are not all in the fuel. But the size of the prize is getting people's attention and can command their loyalty regardless of whether they're concerned about security, prosperity, or environment. Getting off oil helps stanch a vast treasure transfer, cut costs, make jobs, take people like Putin and Chavez and Ahmadinejad off our payroll, and profitably eliminate oil's 43% share of U.S. fossil carbon emissions. So can we next help catalyze a similar turnaround with electricity, whose production emits another 41% of U.S. fossil carbon, 92% of that from coal-fired power plants? How could we save or replace the more than 6 billion tons of coal burned worldwide each year, mostly to make 2/5 of all electricity? Well, for decades, RMI has been the global thought leader on how efficiency can save most of that electricity, whether used in buildings, that's 70% of U.S. electric use, or industry, the other 30%. We've helped scores of utilities, firms, and governments to turn the negawatt idea from a typographic error into an 11-figure industry. From 1986 to 92, we did perhaps the world's most detailed examination, work later republished by our eSource spinoff, of how much electricity can be saved at what cost. The U.S. answer we found was a saving of about 3/4, cheaper than just running a coal or nuclear plant, even if the plant and the grid were free. Today, that potential is even bigger and cheaper because efficiency techniques keep improving faster than they're applied. The ACT Squared project, co-led in the 90s by PG&E, NRDC, Berkeley Lab, and RMI, confirmed that integrative design can make big energy savings cheap. Now this approach to design, codified in my 2007 Stanford Engineering School lectures, is becoming a casebook that we think will irreversibly rearrange designers' mental furniture, transforming how design is taught and done. Our Factor 10 engineering, or 10XE plot for the nonviolent overthrow of bad engineering, shows how to make very large, often tenfold energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. That's one of our most consequential discoveries yet, and I think it's the key to both the oil and the electricity parts of reinventing fire, because the transition from fossil fuels to renewables depends critically upon the radical and lucrative energy efficiency that we've now demonstrated widely in buildings, energy, and vehicles, and now need to take to scale. Meanwhile, we've been learning about renewables too. In 2002, after 27 years gestation, it was kind of like birthing a whale calf, we showed in an Economist book of the year called Small is Profitable why distributed generation is often about tenfold more valuable than had been thought. That fusion of financial economics with electrical engineering is starting to infiltrate the world's largest industry and to influence its investors. Megawatts and micropower, once dismissed as trivial, now dominate the competitive landscape, delivering most of the world's new electrical services. Last year, for the first time in probably a century or so, the world invested more in renewable than in fossil-fueled power generation. Coal, nuclear, and gas-fired power plants have dropped to minority market share simply because they cost too much and incur too much financial risk. But how will all the moving parts fit together to keep the lights on with just renewable power? Our fossil fuel-free house does this, but what about a city, a country, the globe? We often hear that solar and wind power can't do much because they don't always work, but neither does any traditional power plant. RMI's modelers have developed a unique simulation tool to explore how to integrate variable renewables, wind and photovoltaics, into utility operations. Diversifying wind and solar power across larger areas with differing weather can also make them far more reliable, we found. And our initial analysis suggests that integrating variable renewables into the grid, just as utilities now integrate intermittent big power plants into the grid and cope with fluctuating demand, can deliver better service at lower cost and make more profit at less risk. To help our utility partners understand how to do this, as we learn together, RMI is now synthesizing a practical vision of the shape, stability, economics, and transitional path of an efficient, diverse, dispersed, renewable, resilient, and climate-safe electricity system that we hope will work better and cost less than today's grid, and it's looking quite promising. Indeed, our Defense Science Board report recommended last year that to avoid the grid's grave vulnerabilities, military bases should make their own power to run themselves and the surrounding communities with or without the grid, and it turns out most of the 584 bases in the continental U.S. can do this, usually from renewables and often at lower cost. Thus, with electricity as with oil, the Pentagon's leadership will speed progress in the civilian sector. 5 years ago, almost nobody thought the U.S. could get off oil. Now that's a serious goal with encouraging momentum. So can we now imagine getting off the coal that makes half our nation's electricity? Certainly. Here are a few ways. If America used electricity only as efficiently as the top 10 states averaged 4 years ago, 5/8 of all U.S. coal-fired electricity would become unnecessary. Using electricity fully cost-effectively would save even more, displacing all coal power and more. Wind power in available windy sites can displace all U.S. coal plants at least 4 times over, or all Chinese electricity at least twice over. Just the wind power stuck today in the interconnection queue in this country could save half of our coal power. We could save 2/5 of the coal power by properly exploiting industrial cogeneration, plus a lot more in buildings. 1/3 of coal power could be replaced immediately by running already built but partly idle combined cycle gas plants more and coal plants less, at an extra cost manyfold less than displacing coal with new nuclear plants. So nowhere near all of these steps are needed to get off coal, just, let alone the many other attractive options available. We just need to apply part of what we know. To tie all of these pieces together, a grand synthesis led by winning the Oil Endgame co-author Nate Glasgow, who is here with us and who just returned to RMI from Stanford Business School, and myself, will weave the integrative design, the oil, the electricity, the gas, the direct coal, and related stories into a coherent vision with considerable detail of how to win the entire fossil fuel endgame, again, led by business for profit and encouraged by the military for its security mission. We'll describe how the United States and ultimately the world will complete the transition shown in my 1976 soft energy path graph, but doing even more with modern efficiency and rebounding from a 20-year policy-induced delay in renewable deployment. As is our custom at RMI, we will present practical, profitable, transformational solutions in a spirit of applied hope, and we will design powerful ways with many partners to implement and amplify those solutions. This work is audacious, challenging, exhilarating. It reminds me a bit of a passage in the Atchison-Lilienthal report, a year before I was born in 1946, which described thus its novel proposal for preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. They said, "The program we propose will undoubtedly arouse skepticism when it is first considered. It did among us, but thought and discussion have converted us. It may seem too idealistic. It seems time we endeavor to bring some of our expressed ideals into being. It may seem too radical, too advanced, too much beyond human experience. All these terms apply with peculiar fitness to the problem it addresses. In considering the plan, as inevitable doubts arise as to its acceptability, one should ask oneself, what are the alternatives? We have, and we find no tolerable answer." Bucky Fuller best framed this choice that we are all making each day. He said, "If the success or failure of this planet depended on who I am and what I do, then how would I be? What would I do?" Reinventing fire is who we are at RMI, and it is what we must and will now do. Please join us in this exciting journey. Thank you.
Amory, after that, you deserve some water.
Thank you.
Having cooled us all off in such a wonderful way. It is a wonderful vision, and I really salute you for it. And I also salute a wonderful track record for so many years with your colleagues at RMI. You should be very, very proud. But I need to be a little bit provocative here to kick this panel off. And so let me...
Yeah, I know I didn't do very well, so you'll have to substitute.
Let me note a few troubling trends. Virtually every building we build today is still pretty inefficient. And most of our existing buildings waste huge, huge amounts of electricity, gas, water, despite 3-4 decades of really knowing how we could do things differently. Most of the cars we sell today could be doing much, much better, despite decades of understanding what we could be doing. As exciting as wind and solar are, wind is at about 1.5% of US electricity. All solar doesn't even hit 0.25%. So, and of course there's China. One reason we flattened our energy use is that we've moved most of our manufacturing to other countries like China. And of course, China is building a couple of coal-fired power plants a week. I don't say this, I'm a big fan of Amory's vision. I think we can do this. The question is why we haven't. So let me quote Joel, who asked these 4 words. What would it take? What would it take to implement Amory's vision? That's what I think we need to talk about on this panel. And I encourage us to think about it with a triangle that I like to think about the sustainable energy future in, and that is a triangle of technology, policy, and investment. The 3 sort of key aspects of getting this done. And if we only work at one point of that triangle, we're not going to accomplish what we need to when it comes to building a sustainable energy future. So what would it take in terms of technology? What would it take in terms of policy? What would it take in terms of investment? And coming from Google, we like to add, and what could we do with our information economy as well? So with that, let's have at it. Who wants to go first?
I'll start. What would it take? I actually love Joel's framing, and I'm glad that you've amplified it. Within the Department of Energy now, under the leadership of President Obama and Secretary Steve Chu, in my portfolio area, which is efficiency and renewables, we're organizing our work on 4 planks that we think are essential for transformation, because we're actually about no more incrementalism, no more single photos for the annual report of a wind turbine or a compact fluorescent, but what is it going to take to really ramp this up quickly? I mean, there's nobody in the country who doesn't think, oh, that's a nice little thing. But there's too many people in this country who think, oh, that's a nice little thing, right? So what we're talking about is the 4 key ingredients that we've identified are, first, speed and scale, and I think Joel called it scale and speed. I'm okay with either way. But again, there are too many people down the street from where I work in the Forrestal building, in that building that has a funny dome, that don't really believe this can be big and fast. So what we're trying to do is help in the way that we can inside government to create so many examples of big and fast that it's undeniable. So that's first. Second is high impact innovation. The Department of Energy happens to be the largest R&D body in the world. I didn't know that until I went there. What we need to be doing is investing in the high leverage things, and the new criteria for us in this administration is carbon reduction is the biggest driving force. What we need to invest in that gives us leverage, leadership, market transformation, what we also have to decide is what don't we invest in? And sometimes those decisions are harder. The third thing is talent. We have a Kennedy-esque moment to attract the brightest minds in this country to this sector. And in particular, I've got 100 vacancies at the Department of Energy, so anybody who's interested in joining in this little exercise with us for a little while, please let me know. And the fourth is something that the Department of Energy has never thought much about, which is capturing hearts and minds. There are too many people who think of green jobs as something separate, rather than a green job as a good job. We've got to tell those stories with a human face, and I know we all know them here, but we need to go back to our neighborhoods and talk to folks, regardless of how they vote, because clean energy has no partisan lines. Regardless of where they go to church or where they go to school or where they work, we've got to tell them that this is the new industrial revolution. So anyway, we're organizing our work on those 4 areas, and we're looking forward to having you help us out.
The government has spoken.
Actually, I could jump in there. Actually, I was at a recent meeting and I said, we're from the private sector and we're here to help. Because I feel like people in the Congress and in the administration are dying for the private sector backup to help make the case, to show what's possible, the innovators and the entrepreneurs out there to show, and what RMI does so well, to show what companies can do, have done, and where the opportunities are. And that's what we're working to do next week with over 100 CEOs coming into Washington from clean tech, from green business, but also big utility execs. What's fascinating is that we not only have the clean tech and the green guys on the side, but you also have the utilities embracing this as an opportunity as well, and to bring their voices forward jointly. But I'm also interested in the capturing hearts and minds, and that's what has me fired up right now, which is around Copenhagen and this whole global negotiations on climate change, which is, I think, the ultimate black box, and people really don't understand what's happening there and how is it connected to their lives. And so what we're doing is to try to combine experts who can go deep and really understand what's happening there, but then step back and translate it to the public to understand, no matter where you are in whatever country you're in, how is that conversation relevant to you? How does it connect to your life? And to make it real for people. So between this project that we're doing, which combines experts with credible spokespeople, with relationships to the media outlets to push out this content, so the media will cover it more and more effectively, as well as mobilizing the CEOs. We talk about creating a little bit of the Richard Scarry book for the members of Congress who really don't understand what this thing is all about. So those of us who grew up in the United States, I love Richard Scarry books, so it's a good analogy. But to watch some of these members really honestly, those people in that round dome, trying to understand, what is this thing? Is it real? Is it now? And can it scale? So some of the projects will. But I think that's what we have to all be focused on.
Well, I think clearly solutions aren't diffusing fast enough to meet the climate crisis. We felt that at KP for a number of years. And so what we did 4 years ago is we mapped out 25 grand challenges for looking for problems where we thought a technological innovation could make a real difference in the diffusion of a new technology. So for example, large wind is pretty cost-effective renewable, but it's not, as you say, it's not happening quickly enough. So can you make large wind a lot cheaper And can you find large-scale energy storage to make it more dispatchable so it has more economic value? And I think the answers are yes, but you have to go seek out the innovators and enable them. What's the best distributed renewable for your house is probably solar. Can you make solar photovoltaic broadly cheaper than the grid? It obviously depends on your DNI. It depends on how much sun you get at your location, but can you make it cheaper than the grid so that you'd rather make the energy yourself? I think broadly and some time scale, the answer is yes. Can we do it sooner? I think if we accelerate the right kind of innovation, the DOE's been sponsoring a lot of solar innovation, but I think broadly the answer is yes. So we need a lot of this innovation if we're going to meet the climate crisis, because these things are just not happening quick enough, because the bottom line is the CO2 is going up faster than we can stand. So
I think, Dan, it's pretty straightforward. If we want to have velocity in this discussion or in this phenomena that we're all working towards, we have to have some success. And from our world, from the private sector, private investment world, we went too long with too few successes. So there wasn't this notion of pull. I was fortunate enough back in the winter of 2002 to have gone to Dartmouth to do a brief teaching gig, and I met these two kids there, these guys, David Brewster and Tim Healy. And they had this really interesting idea that I had never heard of called demand response. And they explained it to me, and they said, well, we're going to go take power from large users and repackage it and resell it to utilities. And we're going to make it to where they don't have to build these gas peaker plants in downtown New Haven and pollute these low-income environments. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty cool, right? But didn't know anything about it, and these guys were in business school. So long story short, we brought him back. I introduced him to my partner, Adam Grosser, who's a very, very smart guy. And we invested a bunch of money in the company. We became the dominant investor. The company went public in 2007, was worth over $1 billion. We need 1,000 Enernocs.
So that I think really raises an interesting question, because, as Kathy said, DOE's putting serious money into R&D. As Bill said, one of the nation's leading venture firms, fertilizing some really important technology. And, Paul, you just talked about Enernoc, a great example. I think one of the challenges is that we actually can produce good technologies. They often, though, we take them to pilot scale, they work, and then we have a really hard time deploying them at serious commercial scale. It's interesting being at Google, where people sit down at computers and write computer code, and the day for deployment comes, and I got there and I said, what do you mean by deployment? He said, well, we just push this button. We've just deployed this. And I said, I come from this industry where we've been at photovoltaics for 50, 60 years. We're not at 0.25%. What can we do to speed up this process? The technologies work very often. And we even, in some cases, we've even taken them down the cost curve reasonably well. But we have a really hard time accelerating deployment. There's a government answer now that's pending, this Clean Energy Deployment Administration that's in both the House bill and in Senator Bingham's bill. There's a whole set of ideas, but I think we can agree innovation, R&D, all of that has got to be the first big step. And Amory has done so much to move that along. How do we then take the second step, which is really take this stuff to big, big scale?
So let me talk about one example that we've got going, because I share this absolute impatience with deploying quickly, and having been at this for 20 years, we have technologies. This is not a technology problem. This is a mobilization problem. So we've just launched a $400 million program at the Department of Energy that we're calling Retrofit Ramp Up, R squared, because actually what we want is exponential growth in this stuff, and this is how it works. When we'll be soliciting proposals, so listen up if you may be interested in participating in this program. What we've never cracked with energy efficiency is deploying a business model that's sustainable and available to everybody. I mean, as Jim Rogers says, energy efficiency, everybody ought to have universal access to energy efficiency, but it's hard now. If you want to retrofit your house, you've got to make 10 phone calls, you've got to be an expert in the technologies, you've got to be really environmentally passionate, which is a fine thing, but you shouldn't have to be able to take advantage of the savings that you get from energy efficiency. So what we're looking for is 4 to 8 business models where a company and a local community and technology providers go, neighborhood by neighborhood, like a cable TV rollout. They knock on the door, and 9 out of 10 people in the street say, yeah, that's going to save me money. I'm going to say yes, just like they did to cable TV and the internet some years ago. And what we're doing, frankly, we shouldn't need to put $400 million into this to make it happen. I mean, as Amory will tell you, it makes good business sense to do it now. But there are enough of those little barriers that we're putting $400 million out there to sweeten the honeypot so that we can test a few different models. Maybe the cable TV companies will get involved. Maybe the utility companies will get involved. Maybe the big box providers or Walmart's going to get involved. We don't actually really care exactly what the model is, but it has to be a value proposition for customers. It has to be sustainable. It has to be cost-effective energy efficiency, and it has to really demonstrate that in 10 years, everybody's going to be able to get energy efficiency, and building tune-ups are going to be as common as car tune-ups. So that's what we're doing on efficiency, and we hope that we can do some similar things on the renewable side.
That's cool.
And boy, do we need it. So I'd like to pose another question. Obviously, that big dome we keep talking about in Washington, the Capitol building, we're waiting for a lot of things. We're waiting for a lot of things to happen there. And I brought a visual. Kathy encouraged me to bring this out on stage. I printed out what was introduced yesterday, the Kerry Boxer climate bill, and this is double-sided. 847 pages, double-sided. So the Congress actually has some ideas about how to make this happen, how to put a price on carbon, how to do some innovating in the policy world around driving technology into greater use. What we're running up against is a real hard political process in getting something like this adopted. We're obviously feeling it intensely in the healthcare debate. You know, can we sit here today and really think we're going to put a serious price on carbon and build all these other energy policies around that we need? Amy?
Thanks, Dan. Well, first of all, I did want to talk about this because I feel like we have focused so much on the economics and the business case and mobilizing the business voices and economic voices because that is so much of the pushback for taking action politically. But it's also about values. It's about what America stands for. I mean, it really is about doing the right thing, and I think that we can't shy away from talking about that and getting a little touchy-feely and get people to reconnect about what they're passionate about. It's the question you asked earlier that Buckminster Fuller, who knew? What would I do and how would I be, right? And I think that we all have to look at that and what would I do and how would I be, and it's everything from reconnecting to who it's impacting now. I was in Greenland a couple of weeks ago and talking to the Inuit there about the impacts that they're already seeing. And it sounds so trite when you list out all the impacts, but I was just watching a trailer for a new documentary following the president of the Maldives desperately running around in New York last week and over these last months since he was elected after 30 years of dictatorship saying, we're going underwater, how can you be talking about 2 degrees? That's not even enough, and 4 degrees is where the targets currently are, and we just have to start all over. And so we have to start making, I think, the connections to the hearts we talked about before. And there are some exciting initiatives, things like Copenhagen, that the advertising community, I mean, you would argue...
Emphasize that, Copenhagen.
Sorry, Copenhagen, instead of Copenhagen. It's actually pretty great. It's Copenhagen.org is the website, and it's moving from Copenhagen to Copenhagen and what's possible there to come together around this new vision, this new future that we're creating. And there's a great project that's complementary to that called Futurama 2.0 that some folks are working on to visualize that future that we're creating together to get people inspired again. So I feel like we have to look at the depths of this trajectory we're on as far as the impacts, but also get inspired and excited about the future that we're creating together. So I just would urge us to not shy away from digging a little bit deeper to make those connections, because we're all pretty technical and policy wonkish up here, and I think it's important to reconnect to people and what motivates them.
Let's not just cope, let's hope.
Yes, and also, I just have to add one more thing. Let's think about eating a little bit lower on the food chain, because I had a really hard time eating lately when I go to conferences, and I just think that you know, let's look at everything that we're doing, right? So I fly a ton, and that's my big vice. And so I'm just trying to be a bit more aware on what I do. And one of the things that I do is that eating piece. And I think we almost often don't make those connections. And that's the #1 thing we can do as individuals is to go vegan. So just might encourage folks to look at that.
So Bill, how does the investment community get our political leaders better engaged? This is the moment. I think, you know, you're there showing that there's technologies available, there's money to be made, there's change to be had, but we got to translate that into
Right.
political action.
Right, well, that's not my part of what our partnership does. I do the early stage technology. Al Gore works with us, and you know, we have people that go to Capitol Hill and try to help the DOE set up their programs in ways that we think will be maximally impactful. But I think the truth is that if we look at the result, despite a lot of the innovations Amory talked about, we're not winning, we're losing. And so what we're really trying to do is make things that are economically compelling. I don't think the technology we have today, despite all these things we say about we can deploy it, it's not being deployed fast enough. It's not just policy that's holding it back. It's not enough better to get people to just do it. And so I think we do need better so that we can that there can be an adequate rate of deployment. And I'm afraid, you know, I'm all for a climate bill, whatever it can do, but I know what the numbers per ton will be, and they're not enough. When we look at the technologies, they don't switch the things we need from being uneconomical to economical. The numbers simply aren't big enough. They send the right message, they're important to do, but they alone are not enough to tip us from good decisions to good decisions from bad decisions, unfortunately.
Amory, you gave us a very optimistic view of this, you know.
Well, I don't view the glass as half full or half empty. I view it as having 100% design margin, expandable by efficiency. And I actually think on the oil side, and I think we're going to find on the electricity side, that the solutions we have are cheaper than alternatives on the margin that use fossil fuel, even if we were to price carbon at zero, which we shouldn't. The problem, however, in the embedded system is, of course, to beat old coal, not new coal. And we can do that if we count distributed benefits. We can do it with efficiency regardless. And there are some renewables that are starting to do it, but they have a lot of deployment obstacles. So I think the top of our policy agenda should be barrier busting. The alchemy of what Ray Anderson calls stumbling blocks into stepping stones. There are, for example, 60 or 80 well-known market failures in buying energy efficiency. Each one can be turned into a business opportunity. And if you don't do that, each one can be a showstopper. So we need to pay attention to those. And we haven't done that in the past in policy because policy's been dominated by economic theorists who say market failures are unimportant. They're obviously not practitioners, or they would be butting their heads against those market failures every day, and they would know better.
So what's one or two of your favorites?
Well, let's see, 42 states, we still reward utilities for selling you more energy and penalize them for cutting your bill. We still have split incentives between landlords and tenants, builders and buyers, manufacturers and buyers of equipment. PACE bonds will help with a lot of that. See pacenow.org. That's not a done deal, but it's spreading pretty rapidly. 15 states have authorized it. I think another of my favorites is that when you go buy a new car, typically your discount rate is so high, your time value of money is so high that you look only at the first year or two of fuel savings, and whether to buy an efficient car is about as unimportant as whether to buy floor mats. So fee-bates are a really neat way to broaden the price spread between more or less efficient cars of the size you want, so you'll look at the full life cycle saving, and your decision will also be efficient for society. This is not hard to do. We should do it on a state or regional scale first. pilot it in different ways, and then go to federal. This could happen pretty quickly. And we did lay out several years ago in that industry seminar how to do it right, so the information's all on the website. But we've actually been remiss in not pushing that around fast enough, so I think a lot of people don't know that that work exists yet.
Okay. So another aspect of this that we're actually pretty interested in at Google is the information side. We're developing a product called Google Power Meter, which would give people real-time information about their energy use in their home. It's a free piece of software you download as an iGoogle gadget. It's on your home page next to the stocks and the sports and the weather, and we're trying it out. And you know, one of my colleagues discovered that he was in his little apartment building in San Francisco. He was paying for the washers and dryers for his apartment building. It came as a bit of a shock.
Mm-hmm. How low does it read? Wonder if it'll accommodate our house.
Does
it go negative?
It will net meter solar. It'll do all sorts of good things. We're working on those. But I raise it because we're pretty convinced that this intersection of ET, energy technology, and IT, information technology, is a really, really ripe area. Whether it's how to put some smarts into the transmission system so we can better integrate intermittent solar and wind at that transmission level, or, as I said, give people real-time information in their home. You know, the largest appliance in your home is going to be the plug-in vehicle, and we can either do that smart or do it dumb. Dumb would be for millions of these to come home at the same time on a hot day in July and plug in and take down the grid. So let me just pose a final question before we turn to the audience. Where does information technology come into this?
It is central to almost everything we do in terms of our practice, as you know, Dan. So particularly my partners, Adam Grosser and Bunny Weiss, have really led this charge to get our industry focused around the notion of the power of information technology applied to things like the smart grid and smart meters and so forth. Silver Spring is one of our companies where our co-investors are Kleiner Perkins and Google, among others, and GE. They're in the process of deploying 15 million smart meters. In the course of doing that, they're going to transform the way people think about electricity and how they work with it. They're going to transform the relationship that the utility has with the consumer. And that's all driven by IT. It's very, very intense. For all intents and purposes, these companies, Silver Spring, eMeter, Control4, companies like that, you know, they're networking companies, they're software companies. They're run by really smart people who know that world. Fortunately for all of us, they're also people who are really committed to the cause of green, and they really want to be part of the solution. So it's that influence and that confluence of things that I think we need to see more of. And I think we'll see some of our best bang for the buck from the point of where private industry is going to invest in those areas around information technology, and as you described, that confluence. That's a hugely powerful metaphor for us, and we're trying to live it every day.
So, Kathy, is that of serious interest at DOE?
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to be retrofitting 675,000 low-income homes through the $5 billion Weatherization Assistance Project, and we have got to integrate information about the savings to those people. And those people haven't always had access to that information. I mean, none of us have had access to that information. In my prior incarnation, I was a principal in a smart metering company, and we developed this thing called an eco-meter that we found that just the existence of this little device that plugged into the kitchen and talked to the meter on the outside of the house, either through wireless or power line carriers, just having the information in front of them, for the first time, you got a 5% energy conservation benefit. No innovative rate design, no nothing. Just having it there like a speedometer, but it's in your kitchen, the behavior starts to change. The awareness is there. There's this aha moment. And so the power of this, and the device is cheap. And Dan's device, Dan's software is even cheaper than that now.
It's free.
It's free.
It's very cheap.
So absolutely. I mean, if shame on us if we don't integrate the information, you know, as we do all of this activity.
I'm looking over and I see my 14-year-old daughter over there. She knows that little box that we've got. And we do get up in the morning, my son, 9-year-old son, and 6-year-old son, and they look at this thing and they say, "Ooh, what are those numbers?" You know, and so we're going to get the kids engaged too. I have to tell you, I see my wife. I'll tell you one funny story. We moved here from from a very different...
Carol's going, oh my God.
from a very different place, Vermont. And we had a house built in the 1790s, and we decided one day it was time to improve its energy use. When you get those $1,500 a month heating bills in the winter, you sort of say, ooh, we got to get serious. So we called up and got what's called a blower door test, where they come in and pressurize the house and tell you where it leaks. First, he couldn't pressurize the house, it was so leaky. But once he finally pressurized the house, he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, come over, I want to show you something. And there's this thermal imaging that they do with this. And he said, I couldn't quite understand the picture, but he said, bottom line, how many chimneys do you have in this house? And I said, we have 4. He said, no, you actually have 5. He discovered, behind an old 100-year-old wall, a 5th chimney.
Oh my God.
That for 100 years, a wonderful 8 by 12-inch piece of brick ductwork was sucking out 1/3 of the heat in this house.
Oh my God. Wow.
And I said, oh my God, is it going to be hard to fix? He said, oh, it'll take me about 30 seconds. Got a big chunk of insulation and just jammed it up there, and that was it. You know, some of this is pretty simple. So thank you, Carol. All right, I think it's time for our audience to be involved. And I'm told we have roving mics. Our only plea is that we, as much as possible, make these questions as opposed to long political statements. And that way we will have 35 minutes of interesting conversation. So way in the back, I think what you've got to do is find someone with a roving mic.
And introduce yourself.
Yeah, and please introduce yourself. Thank you.
It's not on.
Hello.
Hey.
My name is Scott. I'm one of those lucky ones who went to Esalen and shared a hot tub with Amory.
Why don't we stop there and just go on to the question?
Question. One of the things that hasn't been spoken about tonight is motivating behavior. How do we really change behavior? What do we know? What do we don't know? How do we make, after listening to Amory tonight, how do we make common sense common?
I'll take a first cut at that, because it's that phenomena runs right at the heart of what we're attempting to do with our home. One of the things that we observed as we went in our 20s and 30s and we had some success in life financially, so we watched our friends go off and build sort of these edifices, edify maybe, and universally, no matter what their political persuasion, how environmentally sensitive they were, these things were environmental nightmares. They would put on some Ipe deck on the back that would wipe out some village in Africa. They'd have teak all over the place. It would be as energy inefficient as you could possibly imagine. So from kind of the emotional engagement part of it for us, one of the things that we were trying to do is get people to think, if you do get into a place where you're lucky enough to build a really nice house, then why don't you build it as green as you possibly can? Take it completely in the other direction and try to think of beauty in a different construct. So with our house, we have no paints, we have no stains, we have no varnishes. We have wood. It's FSC certified wood. It's really pretty. And so we're trying to drive people to a notion that says, think about it from a different standpoint. And if I may, in terms of another anecdote around this, we got a lot of motivation. Amory, my wife read Amory's books. That was really the first motivation for us around this. But we met Bill McDonough at the TED conference. We got to meet Al Gore. We got to help sponsor the film when it opened in Palo Alto. So these are all influences. For me, when it hit home was I got a call from my sister. I've got one sister, and she's got her kids. She's got one son, and she has 2 daughters. And she called me and she said that your nephew Wally and your niece Karen had volunteered to go to war in Iraq. And this was 4 years ago. And I kind of looked around at my lifestyle at that point and said, I'm part of the problem. So I want to change that around and get to a place. So our objective as a family, which we may not meet just time-wise, construction-wise, but we'll get pretty close, is we're going to try to take our entire family off of fossil fuels on a day-to-day basis. Our house will power our cars, and we'll stop going to gas stations, because I just don't want to be part of that anymore.
right over here.
Thank you.
Your name, please.
Oh, thanks. My name is Mike Harrison with Sustainametrics. We do sustainability consulting. And first, I just wanted to comment that the idea of a different version of aesthetics, I think, is a really interesting one as we start putting up windmills in beautiful, uncluttered vistas. And the NIMBY is now alternative energy instead of coal, but that's not my question. The question is that I feel a lot of times that I'm on a treadmill, and I'm trying to find that, that line that will motivate people, that'll get them to kind of be the can-do nation that we think ourselves on. And tried a lot of different things over the years, and tried altruism, and that didn't work too well. Tried fear, that didn't work too well. And so I've noticed, Amory, that your recent talk on Forum, you kind of brought competitiveness up, and you talk about China and the raw numbers of engineers they're graduating, their move toward renewable, and I've heard Hunter do something similar. And I guess my big question is, are people responding to the challenge? Is that a compelling argument that you're finding?
It's working pretty well, and Tom Friedman is a wonderful advocate for that view. I think he's absolutely right about where China's headed, and we're, of course, encouraging that. I think there are a lot of other motivations. It's a pretty long list. The one at the top of my list is Applied Hope, which was featured in an essay in the front of last year's RMI annual report. There's some copies around, it's on the web. Applied hope is not mere theoretical hope, it is not glandular optimism. It's quite a deliberate choice, but I think if you read the essay, you'll find it's highly motivating and very trans-ideological.
Did you say glandular optimism? Wow. That's cool. Not exactly sure what it means, but we should be moving over to this side.
There's a guy in the back.
Yeah.
Hi, Scott Nelson.
And can the mic people kind of move up this direction too once? No, I mean for the next question. We've got a whole group up here that wants to ask a question. Go ahead.
Especially, I guess this is for Amory, but anybody that wants to answer it. Policymakers in the transportation sector in my state run into the problem with cleaner vehicles. How do we tax these things? Our tax structure based on what they consider to be a user fee is largely based on a gas tax. We want them to use less of that stuff. That's a good thing. But they still have roads to repair, bridges to repair, and infrastructure to uphold, which electric vehicles will still use. They're struggling with how to properly tax these things as they use the roads. What's the best recommendation for how to create a tax structure to support the infrastructure?
You need to tax cars or driving rather than fuel. We described this in some detail in Winning the Oil Endgame, and there's pioneering work in Washington and Oregon in particular on using telemetrics in a way that preserves privacy to tax you by the mile. Of course, toll roads do the same thing. And of course, there are ways to tax cars that are used widely in other countries. I think the general principle is that the drivers, as a Canadian friend says, should get what they pay for, but should also pay for what they get, so that we pay the cost of driving as drivers, not as taxpayers. And I think there is a wonderful scope for creating a new coalition of anti-tax conservatives plus those who are too old, young, poor, or infirm to drive. That's somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of Americans. And because of our demographics, that immobilized class is growing. These are people who get taxed for the socialized costs of driving, but don't get the benefits. So I think if they rise up and say drivers should pay their own costs, that would very much focus our minds on what it costs to drive, and then we would end up looking a bit more like, say, Singapore, which pretty much charges the full social cost of driving, and has excellent public transport funded by those revenues, quite good land use planning, and very little congestion.
Thoughts? Where are our mic people? Good, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Carol Sturman from Sturman Industries. We have a high-tech, green tech company, but we're small. We're 40 people. We work with RMI, but I have an issue that hasn't been brought up yet. You talk about decide what we don't want to invest in. I think it's perfect. Accelerating innovation, that's perfect. Barrier busting, what would it take? Being from a small company, in each area that you represent, I've found very high challenges. At Department of Energy, I've been told by a top manager, if you don't come with a big company, don't talk to us. We're not going to decide what the technology is. That's a challenge. How do you get, we all know, I think, that many of the breakthroughs that come in innovation come from the smaller, fast-paced, private innovators that get away from the big companies so they can innovate. Yet industry, a problem with large industry is we work with them, one of them tried to take us down. The ones that we do work with typically will cheat us, or they don't want to do, they only want to do incremental steps, but yet that's where the investors go, is where can I make money the fastest, or who's already established. So in each sector that you're in, innovative companies have a problem breaking through. It's called the Valley of Death. Do you have any plans? This is where our answer comes from, is the innovators. How can we break that barrier?
I should mention before you answer that, Carol and Eddie's little company near Colorado Springs has a world-class innovation in super-efficient digital diesels that could revolutionize both vehicles and stationary power generation. It's quite remarkable.
Great. Well, from the perspective of the Department of Energy, I am sorry to hear that that was a response that you got from whoever you got that response from. Secretary Chu is particularly interested in how you take breakthrough science and research and translate it into something that's commercial. And so what we're trying to do is design a full kind of integrated program that goes from really wild, turning sunlight directly into fuel or directly into electricity, through to the commercialization scale. And so there's for very early stage stuff, there's a new ARPA-E program that you may or may not be familiar with, where the thousands of applications that came in, and that process is ongoing. The next stage is kind of the Small Business Innovation Program, SBIR, and again, we're in the midst of a solar solicitation right now where, again, I think there are hundreds and hundreds of applications. So we're hoping that we can do this better than was done in the past. And then as we take things further up to the speed and scale that I'm talking about, it will not probably be without bumps in the road, because we're trying to transform a mega department that has been somewhat underperforming for the past few years, should I say. But I welcome the input, and again, we can hook up afterwards and you can tell me a little bit more about it. We do absolutely have a commitment to innovation, and that it's not just about big companies. And I think, I'd like to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, this is kind of like trying to get regular banks into microcredit. It's difficult for a large institution that has to push large amounts of money out the door quickly to deal with a lot of small organizations. And we've had the same experience with some of our startups. It's just really tough and all credit to Kathy. The level of talent at the top of DOE now is bigger than I've ever seen in any government agency. And thank God it's there, because this is one of the agencies that needs the deepest reform, and it's going to be really hard to do, but if anybody can pull it off, it's this crowd. I must tell you a little Steve Chu story. Last year when Secretary Chu was still running Berkeley Lab, he was given a proposal for the routine refresh of the supercomputer center, and he read it and said, wait a minute, this thing's going to use more electricity than the rest of the lab put together. I'm not going to approve that. Bring me back a design 10 times more efficient and I'll consider it. And then he brought me in to tell him how to do it. This is a guy not afraid of the sound of breaking glass. He runs toward it.
I can attest to that.
I will note one thing quickly. I'm a big fan of Secretary Chu and the whole team and Kathy, and very warm memories of my time there. I think we do face a pretty interesting moment, though, when the stimulus funding runs out and we have an unbelievable budget deficit in Washington, and there's going to be a real difficult moment whether Congress is really willing to step up and continue serious appropriations for this 18 months from now. We have unprecedented amounts of money for clean energy as a result of the stimulus. We could fall off an absolutely horrendous cliff 18 months from now when it comes to the budget for all these things that we care about. So I would note that as a really serious political matter for anybody who cares about clean energy. We obviously need to put a price on carbon and get climate legislation passed. We also need to make sure Congress doesn't pull the rug out from underneath this effort that we finally have funded. The dog finally caught the car, as we've said. And this is a real serious risk.
And I think we also need to figure out how to fund in a way that covers integrative projects. We've actually been scanning DOE solicitations, and there's hardly anything in there for which our integrative work would qualify.
The stovepipes live, but I think Kathy and others understand that. And that can be
we do.
It's hard.
But there is definitely a link between the climate legislation and that funding, given how much money will come in from the sale of those carbon allowances. So getting that legislation done can help to maintain that funding.
Right. All right. Right down in the middle, right there. Yes. Thank you.
Hey, am I on? Aris Harmon, recent graduate of the Presidio School of Management, I guess now Presidio Graduate School, they just changed the name. I suppose apropos of the congressional issues, you know, we could reinvent the Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps, but I think going back to the question that the gentleman was not asking earlier about NIMBYism, I actually, looking at a lot of projects that are out there, Cape Wind, solar down in Southern California, these sorts of weird local issues actually seem to turn into fairly significant obstacles to many of these deployment projects. And I wonder to what degree federal and state level policy could route around some of these and say we're going to apply the objective standards, and your invented, oh my gosh, this turbine is going to stand in front of the sun and cause epilepsy type stories are no longer going to be an obstacle.
I'll take a first cut at this one. I think that there's no doubt that federal policy can help, but what we're all making the same observations, because the NIMBYism is cropping up with every single renewable resource now, and it's. I guess what I would also urge as we wrestle with federal policy in Washington, I would also urge the investor community to not dismiss or dismiss the need to engage the community, just like every other business that's been ever trying to site a factory in any line of business has ever done for the past 20 or 30 years. I mean, since the birth of the environmental movement in 1970, old line businesses have realized we need to have, if we want to site something, we need to engage the community, we need to explain what it is we're doing, we need to get buy-in. That's not necessarily going to be all the answer, but I think there are those of us that are in the clean energy field that just feel like that the good of our technology is so self-evident that we don't really need to bother with that. And I think that what we're seeing now is that we do need to bother with that.
Absolutely, because we can't have a double standard. If we want the oil and gas guys who are destroying the sagebrush parts of the West, we can't do the same thing with clean energy as well.
And I think we're also going to have to do something more, which is build more transmission capacity, which is in certain respects even harder to site. It may be, and I think Amory's right, there is huge opportunity around distributed generation, which reduces the need for transmission, but we're not going to get away with none. So, but people are talking 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 miles of new transmission capacity. That's tough to site. And there's definitely ways the federal government could be helpful in that regard.
We had a very good discussion with Chairman Wellinghoff of FERC about that last night.
And he's got some great ideas. Right there, waving in the back. Yes.
James Bill, I'm an architect, and we specialize in passive house as a way of getting deep energy reduction. And we also consult with Marin County and the city of Berkeley about climate change and buildings. And one of the things I'm concerned about is this sort of notion of home tune-ups, because all these communities have these greenhouse reduction goals of 80% by 2050 and 20% by 2020. Well, the city of Berkeley a long time ago figured out that to get 20% of all of their buildings to that kind of reduction by 2020, they can't do it with all the buildings. So they need to focus on getting 30% of the buildings to 80% reduction. So that's not really a tune-up, that is deep surgery. And you know, I think that that's really the issue here. It's like, you know, if we're going to try to address this climate change, we need deep surgery. We don't need just mild tune-ups. We need to really go get all these, you know, a bunch of these buildings, you know, really deeply energy reduced and greenhouse gas, you know, carbon reduced. So I'd like you to address the deep surgery question.
Well, so RMI's commercial buildings initiative just launched focuses specifically on deep retrofits to save the most energy that is cost effective as an integrated package, like the Empire State Building project, writ much larger. And then, of course, we want to take that to a large scale, so it's deep and broad. The key is often to coordinate the deep retrofit with improvements that are being made anyway to renew the facade or the mechanical equipment of a building. Then you can piggyback on that, and the economics become much more attractive.
All right, so just quickly on that, I spend most of my time looking at things in the built environment. My two personal investments within our portfolio are companies called Sirius Materials, which makes these really aggressively energy efficient windows, and another company called CalStar Products. The founder of both of those is a gentleman named Mark Paratta sitting over there. And our focus around that is really along the lines of what you're talking about. I think the issue is that you have to be a little bit careful. I understand your point, but if we, you know, it's going to be, there are 1,000 different pieces of this solution. You know, the analogy we always use around this is that, you know, we've got this bucket, so the bucket's got a big leak in it. Do we run out and get a hose and put more water in the bucket, or we spend time fixing the leak? The better analogy is that it takes 1,000 different pieces to fix that leak to make things more efficient. So if we can put in highly energy efficient windows, then we get, you know, further down the path. If we can change some of the things that we're doing around our HVAC and so forth, we get further down the path. I think we have to be a little bit careful with the notion that you have to kind of take everything all the way to be able to accomplish something in this. I think if you do that, you'll potentially demoralize a lot of people that are doing the best they can really at an incremental level, because that's kind of all they can do.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, I think it actually is deep and broad. I mean, I think it is not one or the other. I mean, one of the things that we got through the Recovery Act is it used to be that a weatherization, the maximum amount of money that you could spend on a weatherization project was $2,000, $2,400, something like that. We now have raised the ceiling so it's $6,500, which means that you can go further up the supply curve of energy efficiency options. I mean, again, it's all cost effective, but again, this is a low income, this is kind of like a food stamps program for low income people. I mean, it just makes them be able to save money on their energy bills. But we can now actually pick more of that fruit. And so that would obviously, what we were aiming to do is do everything that's cost effective as much as we can. I mean, we're building a handheld, a tool, when we're alpha testing it right now, where home inspectors are going to be able to go into a home and in 20 minutes be able to basically assess, here's the asset rating, here's the performance rating based on utility bills, here's everything that you can do that's cost effective. Oh, by the way, here's a finance vehicle, so there's no money up front to get this done. And this is going to be started, you know, we're rolling it out this fall, and it's going to be basically available to anybody who wants to use it for free starting in January.
That's great. I just want to make sure that in doing the easy packages quickly on a large scale, we don't cream skim. Because if, for example, in most climates, you go from single to double glazing, where you should have gone from single to, you know, an R10 glazing at almost the same cost, then you've made the step from R2 to R10 economically inaccessible.
Right.
That's right.
It's a valid point.
All right, right down here, we'll get a question from the young generation.
Hi, I'm Chapin Boyer. I'm a student at the Urban School of San Francisco, and so far you've talked a lot about capturing the hearts and minds of people, getting people really inspired and thinking about environmentalism. And I was just wondering what needs to be done to get students and, you know, the younger generations involved. What kind of we need to do so that we're growing up in an environment where we are thinking about these issues and trying to help solve these problems, so that by the time we've kind of taken over, we've got all the knowledge and we know what we're supposed to be doing.
Do you have suggestions about that?
Not yet.
I think the answer is Facebook, Twitter, and everything else. And I mean that. And I'm one of the least equipped people to be talking about that, as my daughter will tell you. But engaging young people through the communications mechanisms that they engage each other with, I think, is vital. And we're finding with this Google Power Meter that, you know, there's all sorts of ways to get people talking to each other in a modern fashion, and people can compare how they're doing in their individual homes and share ideas and share results. So I do think, you know, approaching young people in the means by which they communicate with each other is really going to be vital, whether it's the technological changes or, frankly, gaining the hearts and minds, getting the political change we need. I think that's going to be very critical.
Well, and also I'd just add that there's a great new book series that's just Green My Parents, and it's actually fantastic.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Green My Parents, yeah. Well, because my mom's an environmental educator, and she gets yelled at all the time by the parents saying, "How dare you tell me to recycle?" And she's like, "I didn't, I just taught your kids about it." So the kids are they're the most effective communicators.
We have a real challenge in this country in that, you know, the most innovative departments, the scientifically oriented departments that are training people, most of the graduate students aren't born in the United States because people here don't want to go to study in those departments. I was on the phone with a professor today. We want to hire one more person. He says, "Well, you know, I got to deal with the visa issue here because there's no one I can hire except from overseas." The jobs in the future are going to come from people who make things. We can spend a lot of time fixing each other's houses to be more energy efficient, but at the end of the day, somebody has to make something, or the economy can't work. And if we don't do the innovation that creates the good, high-paying jobs, the rest of the economy is not going to function. We've already got that problem. We have a green problem, and we have a jobs problem. And a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, unfortunately, you know, fixing the houses in Berkeley is nice, but that won't create the high-paying jobs that drive the economy. It's important, but it's not enough. There's a huge piece missing if that's all we do. We got to innovate, and we got to create innovative industries.
And that's about quality education. And my next part of the answer was actually that beyond the Green My Schools, Green My Parents, they have a next one, which is Green My Schools. And it's actually really robust and includes a whole project and commitments that are made by kids, and it's online and totally accessible. But also it's about teachers sharing effective curricula that are working. And there's a new green curriculum started by the director of the movie Fuel, which won the Sundance Audience Award last year. It just was launched, and so it allows teachers to share curricula online outside of the traditional standard curriculum. So that's another resource, but it's about the quality of the education, but also the practical implementation that you guys can do both at home and in schools.
Meanwhile, if you want to hedge your bets, learn Mandarin.
Was that an Amory line or what? Where do you come up with these? I thought I was pretty good, but I don't know. All right, waving way in the back with a dark beard.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Faludi. I used to work for RMI. I now work for Project Frog, and I teach at Stanford. And I have a DOE question. So I've heard of ARPA-E, this new part of the department, and it sounds like a potentially game-changing institution that could maybe start some of these industries that Bill Joy is talking about. Or maybe after the stimulus funding is gone, it may disappear. Can you tell us more about it and what you think it's going to do?
I don't know whether it's going to disappear. I certainly hope not. But the idea is basically DARPA has been very, very successful for how long has DARPA been around?
Defense Advanced Projects Research
40
years.
40 years, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's been a very good model for funding really breakthrough ideas that eventually have major, first of all, they have implications for defense, and then they transform and spread out into the economy more widely. The idea is taking very early stage breakthrough ideas and funding them, and probably this year I think there'll be at least 1,000 projects, I think, that'll get funded, something along those lines. I hope that if it's successful, that we will go to our friends up on Capitol Hill, the appropriators, and say, look, wasn't this neat? This was filling a gap in the marketplace for very early stage breakthrough ideas. It has borne fruit because these early stage ideas have turned into small businesses with benchtop technologies that are then creating jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's tapping into some of the best innovative thinking in our university system. It's funding, it's funding Nobel laureates to do their next thing, to think big thoughts. It's creating institutions that might end up being like Bell Labs was. So I don't know, I hope. I mean, if what will make it easier for us to get continued funding for it is if we make it a success now. So I hope that
there's a lot of ideas out there. In the last 5 years, we've looked at about 5,000 business plans in renewable technologies, and we funded 50 of them. So, I mean, a lot of the other ones had merit. There's just, hopefully we're meritocratic, and I think ARPA-E's process is meritocratic as DARPA's was. Yeah. And that we got to fund the best ideas. Not all the ideas are going to get funded, and not all the best ideas are going to get funded, but we're hopefully funding a substantial number of great ideas.
What makes DARPA work is terrific program officers who are really smart, have a lot of authority, and take a lot of risk. That's not a government habit, so you have a lot of culture changing to do.
Yeah, we do, and Secretary Chu is committed to ensuring that the merit review process, it is a meritocracy, attracts the most distinguished thinkers in each of the various disciplines. And that's something that we all, at my level within the department, are investing a fair amount of time into. And again, that's a little bit of a reform process, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right, we have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah, there's one.
My dear daughter has a question. All right. All right. Well, just be careful, okay?
Hi. As a student and a member of the next generation, I was recently assigned an assignment in English to write a letter to President Obama on an issue that I cared about, and I chose to write it on energy. And I was wondering, what is the stance the U.S. is taking on negotiating climate and energy with the, what is the stance the U.S. is taking on negotiating climate and energy with the rest of the world?
Well, the president is very committed to having an economy, bringing our carbon emissions under control in the United States and globally, and believes very strongly that the United States needs to lead, and that's why he's been extremely supportive of the Congress's action on, passing a carbon cap for the economy. But he also realizes that we have to do this in a way, when we have an international agreement on carbon, that it has to be fair and equitable. So as the largest cumulative polluter over history, we have to take our action first. We have to be very serious about it. We have to hold our heads high. We have to take advantage of the competitive opportunities that arise from that. And we have to construct an agreement that is fair and equitable particularly for the developing world, so that they can both control carbon, but get access to the technologies that will make it improve lifestyle while they reduce their carbon pollution.
The United States has a great opportunity for leadership right now because our legislation has the potential to create the first ever market to protect standing forests from being cut down. It's actually a really exciting opportunity for leadership. If we can get this legislation passed, even before we get agreement in Copenhagen, we would create the first market to actually value standing forests to prevent them from being cut down. So it's another opportunity for the U.S. to lead.
All right. Drum roll, please. Our last question.
What a deal. My name is Gary Klein. I'm with Affiliated International Management. I used to work for the state of California in energy. My question has to do about, actually I have 2 parts to this. One has to do, why are we talking only about energy? Why aren't we talking about other resources like water? And I think we ought to be doing water-G audits when we do low-income energy efficiency. We ought to be doing way more than just the energy piece. So a comment on that would be useful. By the way, I spend most of my time in hot water, so that's why I talk about it. But the other question I have has to do with feedback, which was mentioned by more than one of the panelists. It seems to me that the value of feedback is in its ability to be predictive on my next bill. And unless I'm able to make a better decision for my own energy use today to affect my bill, which comes in 6 weeks or a month or 2 months, whatever it is, it's not particularly useful. It's nice, but not as useful as the feedback that would be predictive about my use. A related feedback question has to do with how do I get feedback on the people who are installing those home energy retrofits or energy efficient products or renewable systems, whether it be the home or the business, so that me as the next decision maker in the process can decide which company does a good work regardless of the materials they use? Those are my two questions related to feedback, please.
On the second one, I think many of the outfits that are constructing software, and maybe Jack Hittery will describe one on the investment panel tomorrow, for steering you into, say, photovoltaics or efficiency retrofits, are building in quality feedback, kind of like ratings on Amazon books and such. Of course, there has to be due process so that you can't get undermined by nasty comments posted by your competitors without some ability to correct mistakes and just get genuine, fair comment. But I think we all recognize systems without feedback are stupid by definition. Yeah.
I mean, and what we're hoping to construct as we build this tool is a certification program, an auditing program, a feedback program, so I mean, the power of information exchange compared to 20 or 30 years ago is just unbelievable. I mean, you know, and Amory talked about it with Amazon, but you think about when you're choosing a restaurant, when you're trying to decide where to go on vacation, TripAdvisor is incredibly powerful now. So I think that what we need to do is have those software tools be available so that there is real-time feedback.
Well, at Google, you know a bit about that.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, I think starting with this simple Google Power Meter, that people are going to get pretty immediate information, and at least our work to date, testing this with a number of people, show that you know pretty quickly what's going on in your home and can take action pretty decisively. And I think linking that to an audit that establishes a baseline of how you're doing that and providing real-time information and feedback, I think we're creeping up on a lot better system for helping people get control of their energy destiny. Back to your first question, absolutely, positively, we got to get to water, we've got to get to natural gas, we've got to get to home heating oil, we've got to get to a lot of things that you know, make up the carbon footprint, the resource footprint that all of us have. And you know, what we're doing with Power Meter, what a lot of other companies are doing, is going beyond electricity, you know, getting to these other fuels. And it's not all that different. You know, you can build a smarter water meter, you can build a smarter natural gas meter, and you can put this stuff up on the internet and get it to your laptop or your cell phone. This isn't rocket science.
In fact, Judy and I have just renovated our passive solar banana farm in Old Snowmass to bring the technologies up to date from 1983 to 2009, state of the art. And one of the nicest parts of that is Johnson Controls gave us an industrial strength data acquisition system. So we're now monitoring 200 data streams of, you know, dry bulb temperature, relative humidity, mean radiant temperature, airflows, water flows, currents, you name it. And as soon as we've commissioned the software, that will go up on the web so that super efficient building can be a science experiment for the world. That'll be really fun.
On that note, we...
Hey Dan, I'm so sorry, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
My name is Paula Ostrander, and I work for the government as well, which is probably why I'm late getting to my questions. Because I think about it a lot, think about what the CDC would say, what the air district would say. If I could ask this question, and then I decided it'd be great if I did. So we at the city do door-to-door programs for energy retrofits with our businesses mostly, and we're now expanding this to our consumers. So two short questions, one to Catherine and one to Dan, which is, Catherine, would you accept a proposal from the city of San Francisco for R2 for commercial or residential retrofits, weather weatherization? And Dan, if we did submit a proposal, would you grace us with allowing us to use the power meter to measure in each home what was going on?
Yeah, okay, so yes, the process is that we will have issue a solicitation call. It's called a FOA. FOA, what does that stand for? A
Federal Opportunity Announcement.
It's one of these new acronyms for me. Federal Opportunity Announcement. But that'll be issued sometime in October, and we will be welcoming all comers and partnerships to come and make a proposal to us.
can get the government out of the man, or the man out of the government, not the government out of the man. I just want to wrap that water question, because I think it gets to a more fundamental question, which is how do we value the services that nature provides? And I think that there's some really exciting work around recognizing that we're just starting to put a price on carbon in the atmosphere, and some innovative work around pricing water, but also biodiversity and other markets, so we can start to fundamentally shift how our economic system works, our accounting system works. And I'm hoping that the brains at RMI will take that on more, because we need your brains and your work and your impact on that as well.
You should buy your offset when you fly out of here from the new kiosk. It's at the airport. We support the San Francisco Carbon Fund, which funds not only carbon sequestration, but stormwater management globally.
And even better, if instead of buying an offset, you could actually put that money into a real project that you actually knew was going to...
That's what carbon offsets do. Now we're getting into the controversy.
All right.
Or you can give it to RMI.
So yes, we would love to talk to you about putting Google Power Meter into homes in San Francisco. On that note, we are the only things that stand between you and ice cream. So,
which is melting.
Which is melting as a result of a warming planet. In any event, thank you, Amory, for your glandular optimism. Thank you to our brilliant, brilliant panel. Really wonderful panel. Let's give them a big round of applause. And thank you to our wonderful and not shy audience. Let's go have some ice cream. Thank you very much.